Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to be talking about APIs, web scraping, and its ethics. Now, we've talked a lot in this class about processing texts, but we haven't really dealt much with how to get these texts. And of course, one of the best ways is via the internet. You don't want to have to type up all of these old documents that you're interested in working with. Many websites offer APIs, which are application programming interfaces. And this is an interface that the website makers have made so you can call into their system and get information from them. Now, not every website has something like this, but it's also possible to scrape the website, or doing something that's known as web scraping when they don't have something like an API. But you should always think very carefully about the ethics of it, because often website owners have good reasons to not want people to scrape it. Sometimes they might have sensitive data on their website, or in other cases, bandwidth might be so expensive that they don't want users coming in and making a lot of requests to their website. So anytime you're thinking about scraping a page, you should first look at its robots.txt file. For example, you can go to https englishwikipedia.org/robots.txt. So I'm going to copy this, and we'll go ahead and take a look at it really quickly, just so you get a sense of what this looks like. This is Wikipedia's robot.txt file. And essentially what it is a description of what Wikipedia thinks robots should be allowed to do on its website. And if you're writing a web scraper, you are in fact a robot. Now, anytime it says disallow / that means it doesn't want this particular user agent, Media Partners Google, to do anything on its root directory. And that's basically everything. If it's disallow empty, it means that the bot is allowed to go everywhere on the website. So there's a lot of useful information here. Generally speaking, Wikipedia is really nice because they do allow user-made bots to look at a few websites, or a few parts of its web page. But always look at this page to make sure that what you're doing is allowed. But first, check to see if there's an API, because the API will give you much better results, often already formatted in a way that the computer can use. But first and foremost, you want to be a good citizen. If you find yourself running requests inside of a loop, so if you want to download 10,000 pages from Wikipedia, don't let your computer run as fast as it possibly can, because it will hit them many, many times, and you'll probably get banned. You'll want to run requests inside a loop and add something like time.sleep, which will actually slow the loop down. So you can say sleep 1, which will sleep for a second between each of its requests, and it's much better to do it that way. But first, to get anything off of the internet, we're going to have to connect to it. And we're going to use the urllib.request module. Now, this comes as part of the Python standard library. And then we want a URL to actually run it on. In this case, I'm going to put the URL for the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, just because it's a website and it's an interesting website. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a request object to open this page. So what I'll do is I'll say urllib.request.urlopen, and then I'm just going to give it the URL. I could type in something like www.google.com, and this will create a request object. Then what I do is I'm just going to read that request to get the contents of this page. Then I'm going to close the request, and I'll go ahead and print the contents. Print the contents. So let's go to our terminal, and we'll run Python 24 web1, urllib1. And what we can see is we actually just get the HTML of this particular page. It's pretty nice. Python handles all of the details of doing this. I'll clear that off, and let's look at this a little bit deeper. What if I want to actually save this information? Because if I want to get the data that's on this particular Wikipedia page, I don't necessarily want to call it every time I'm trying to analyze it. So I'm going to save it as a file. So what I'll do is all of this code is exactly the same, but I'm going to decode the results into a string. So I'll go ahead and run this, and what we can see is that it connects to this website and it returns the HTML. But the interesting thing about this is that this HTML is not a string, but instead it's bytecode. And we can tell that because here it starts with a B. Now, often what we'll want to do is we'll want to save this so we don't have to be calling this web page every time we want to parse something out of it. So to save this web page to file, what I need to do is I need to do the exact same thing, but I need to decode it, because I need to decode the results into a string to save it to file. So what I'll do is I'll just say with open wikiattorneys.html, write encoding equals UTF-8 as wf.write HTML string. Okay? So this is really the only thing that is something we haven't seen before. We're turning it from bytecode into a string. I'll go ahead and run this here. And what it'll do is now it will create a file called wikiattorneys.html. And you'll notice my computer wants to open it in Chrome, but I can open this with Visual Studio Code. And we can see that now we have this nicely easy to read HTML. And so we have this nice and saved. And in a bit, we'll get to parsing that. But first, I want to talk about the Wikipedia API. Because Wikipedia actually has a really nice API that you can access via its API entry point. So generally, rather than going straight to the page that you're looking at, you're going to want to use this. Because these are designed for communication requests from applications rather than the page which is designed to be read by a human. Now, Wikipedia has a lot of different ways of accessing its data, but here is the URL to one of its APIs. And I actually adapted this from Daniel Schiffman's wonderful tutorial video that I've linked to right here, in which he, I think, is using P5.js to do this. But here what we're doing is we're using Python, and I'm saving the API URL to this handy variable that I'm calling API URL. This looks a little complicated, but it breaks down pretty logically. I have, of course, English Wikipedia here. I have api.php. And then I can tell it that I have a certain type of search, in this case, open source search. And the return format is JSON, or JavaScript Object Notation. And this just tells me what the returned object is going to look like. So if I build this out properly, I can actually build myself a nice little search platform. So I'm going to add a search term to the end of this to run a search. And in this case, I'm just going to look at pandas. So here my API call is just going to equal the API URL plus my search term. So this is just going to be search equals pandas. So then I'm just going to send this to Wikipedia. I should point out that whenever you access a website from a script, it's probably good practice to have a way for the website to identify who you are. You can put in your own email address, so wiki header equals user agent Paul. You can add an email, so on and so forth. So I'm going to create a request to send this that incorporates our header. So this looks a little bit different than what we saw before, but we have urllib.request with a capital R. Then I'm going to give it my API call, which is the URL for the API call, and I'm going to give it a header, which is just this header right here. Then what I'm going to do is, now that I have this request object put together, I'm going to give it to urllib.request.urlopen. And I'll give it wiki request. And then it's just going to be saved in this request variable. Then what I'm just going to do is I'm going to read it, and I'm going to decode it. And then I'm going to go ahead and close the request, because I don't need it once I've done this. And I'll go ahead and print the response data. So this looks a little complicated, but it's actually relatively nice and simple. Look through this code and kind of try to absorb what's going on here. So we will go over here, and I'll do Python 24 Web 2 Wiki API. And we'll run this, and we've now made a call to the Wikipedia API. And the results look like this. Now these results are in JavaScript object notation, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But what we can see here is we have the request that we made. Then we have a list of the pages that are resulting. So we have a panda disambiguation page, pandas, pandas software, pandas and people, pandas gone wild tour, pandasthumb.org, and pandas Iran, so on and so forth. And then in the next list, we actually have a little bit of an introductory paragraph for that page. And then we also have a list of all of the URLs of those pages. So this is a really nice thing that we get out from the Wikipedia API. If we look at this next code, we can actually think a little bit more about parsing the JSON that we're getting out of this. So in order to do that, Python comes with a nice JSON library that makes it easy to turn these JSON objects, which are strings, into Python objects that we can work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make that same call to the Wikipedia API, but instead of printing off the results, what I'm going to do, which I'm saving in this response data variable here on line 11, is I'm going to give it to json.loads response data. Essentially, this is turning this the response to our request into a Python object that I'm saving as wiki results. Now, if you remember from just looking a second ago, the results came in 4 lists. There's the search term, a list of titles for the pages, the taglines for those pages, and the URLs. So we can actually use the URLs to retrieve the contents if we wanted to. And if you watch that Schiffman tutorial video, you'll see that he does some really cool things with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and print out the title, tagline, and URL for every item in our results. I don't really need to get back the search term I used. So what I'll do is I'll say for title, tagline, URL in zip, wiki results 1, 2, and 3, print page title is the title, the tag is the tagline, and the URL is the URL. So we'll go ahead and we'll run this Python 24 web 3 JSON, and we'll run this. And we'll see here is a nice formatted description of all of the results we just got. So you can see that this is a really nice way of getting data and then organizing it and using it in your code. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about this API over here. We can actually build a program that is a little more flexible than the one that we just looked at. Because Wikipedia's API doesn't just give us access to all of the information that you would see when you're looking at the page, although it does do that. It also gives you information about things like, what are all the pages that link into this page? What's the edit history? What categories does this page belong in? What are all of the links on this page? So it breaks it apart in really, really useful ways. So what I can do is I can dive further into this by saying, OK, here's the base URL to this API, which I'm going to say is just api.php, action equals 0, or just action equals. So the action is going to specify the kind of call you're making. We used search, but we can also use query, which will actually get into the contents of a specific page. And all of the different terms in the query are linked with the ampersand. Here I'm just saying connector is and. Properties are the properties of whatever action you're running. You can use things like links here, categories, links, and so on and so forth. If you want to learn more about it, you can check out this link that I've put here on line 16. Here I'm just using a property of categories. We want to set the output format. You can use XML, JSON, a few other things. I'm going to go ahead and search in titles for the page that I want. And I should point out that we need to replace the spaces in our call with underscores so it doesn't get rejected because it doesn't like spaces. And so then we'll give the API a title of the Wikipedia page that we want to get information about. And here I'm going to look at the pandas software library. And here I can just say if there's a space in my search term, go ahead and replace that space with an underscore. I could just have easily have said panda underscore software, but I choose to do it this way. On line 32, what I'm doing is I'm using an F string to put together the entire call. And this looks a little complicated, but really you only need to change these values in here to change up your search. So it's not that bad. You don't need to mess around too much. So I'm saying the base URL and the action, and property equals prop, and format equals format info, and search method search term. Okay? So it's relatively straightforward. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and print out the full call that I'm going to be making. And then I'm going to make the request and pretty print the results. That is, let's break them apart and make them look a little fancier. So I'm going to make this request. I'm going to create the request object, and then I'm going to send it to URL open as page. We've seen this. Here I'm using the context manager to make this call. And then I'm saying the data equals page.read.decode. The JSON data equals the JSON.loads data. And then pretty data equals JSON.dumps, JSON data indent4. So essentially, I'm just using a built-in method that takes the JSON object, which is we can actually get information out of, and turn it into a fancy-looking string. And then we'll go ahead and print it. So I'm going to go ahead and say Python 24 web 4 more API. And then what we can see is it looks like this. We can see that I ran my query on Pandas software. We can say the page ID is 388-33779. Its title is Pandas software. Then we can see what are the categories that it belongs into. All articles lacking reliable references. This is maybe a little snarky. This is Wikipedia, of course. Articles lacking reliable references from August 2018. Free statistical software, Python scientific libraries. And so you can see this is a really nice way of getting information about something. But let's move back to that HTML page we downloaded a minute ago, because this is how scraping essentially works. This is how APIs work. Now let's go back and think a little bit more about scraping specifically. So I'm going to go back over to my code, and we're going to look at this web5 soup.py. Now, essentially, all scraping is it's going to the page, getting the contents, and extracting information from it. Now, if you're using a page like Wikipedia, it's relatively easy because Wikipedia is a static page generally, so there's not dynamic information loading in. Now, in some cases, if you're looking at a page that has a lot of information that's loaded in from a server using JavaScript or some sort of asynchronous loading technology, it's going to be a little more difficult. It's technically still possible in most cases, but we're not going to get into that. We're going to talk about the straightforward process of getting information out of a static HTML page. So remember that I saved that Wikipedia attorneys.html file earlier? We're going to be scraping information out of that. So essentially, I'm going to use the Beautiful Soup library from BS4 import Beautiful Soup, which is a nice parsing library for HTML that will let us get the information out easily. I'm going to make this empty variable called soup here because I want to use a context manager to open this wiki attorneys, but I want to not have everything indented over. This is a little strange, but don't worry too much about it. So I'm going to say beautiful soup rf.read because my rf is just opening this wiki attorneys HTML file, and the encoding is UTF-8. So I'm saying inside this beautiful soup object, create it using the string here, rf.read, and then this lxml is the parser that I want to use. Now, you don't have to specify this, but if you don't, you'll get a little warning. It just chooses the best one that's available. Now, you can pretty print the HTML using soup.prettify. So if I just said if I printed soup.prettify, it'll give me a nicely formatted HTML, but I don't really need to do that. But if I want to get all of the links from this page, I can say soup, which is now my parsed web page, find all A. Now you can just find without the all, like that, but this will only find the first instance of this, and we might want all of the links. So what we can do is we can print the text and URL from the first link. So what I can do is I can say links to.string. In fact, this is not the first link. This is the third link on the web page. So I can say links to.string. And this is the link text. And the URL is links to.gethref. Because inside the HTML, the actual URL is stored inside an href attribute. So what I can do is I can print the link text and the URL. So it's pretty straightforward. But I can also get information off the page using my knowledge of HTML. So in order to get really good at scraping, you're going to have to learn a little bit of HTML, which is not something we really cover in this class. But if you're interested, you're always welcome to reach out. So what I want to do is I want to find all of the lists on this page, because I know this particular page. Let's actually just go look at it. I'm going to go ahead and go back over here to this page here, and I'm going to copy it over so we can take a look at what this looks like. So I'll copy this, go over to Chrome, and look here, make this a little smaller, and we'll see that it looks like this. So I might want to get this list of attorneys general and the dates that they were in office, and we can see that it goes all the way up to the current Attorney General, United States Attorney, not Attorney General, excuse me, US Attorney. Attorney General is a different thing. So if I want to get this list and put it in a structured format into my Python code, what I can do is I can go back over to soup, close this, and I can say find all of the unordered lists on the page, and that list is one of them. And I know by looking at it that the third list on the page contains the information on all of the US attorneys. This is wrong here. I apologize for that. And then I can get each item from that list. So I'm going to say the third list on the page, find all LI. Those are the list items and save it as attorneys general. So you can print out the most recent one, which is the very last item in the list. And I can say print current attorney general is attorneys general -1, which is the last item on the list, .text. So I'll run this, Python web5, 24, web5, soup. And we can see that the third link is just #p-search. This is usually an internal link. And the current Attorney General is Jeffrey Berman, who has served since April 25th, 2018. Now we could get fancier, and we could parse this into a structured file using regular expressions. But for the moment, that's all we need to know. This is an introduction to the beautiful soup library. There's a lot of really good documentation online, and in the syllabus to this class, you can find more information there. And you can use it to scrape a lot of really interesting information off of a lot of websites. But let me reiterate that you should only use scraping as a last resort and when you're sure that it's an ethical thing that you should be doing. Generally speaking, you should avoid it. And if there's any question in your mind about whether or not you should scrape something, just reach out to the website owner. In many cases, they'll be willing to share their data with you. Not always, but sometimes. With that, I've covered all of the code that we're going to be talking about in my Hacking the Humanities course this semester. Now, I may extend this, and I'll be going back and I'll be editing certain episodes as I discover problems with them. So if you have any thoughts or suggestions, please feel free to reach out. My email address is pavirtaler@hum.leidenuniv.nl. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I want to make this the best series it can be, and I want to continue to improve it as time goes on. And if you have any more general questions about the concepts we talked about in this class, also feel free to reach out. I'll be adding more visualizations and animations that explain these concepts to this channel as time goes on. For the moment, there's already one on stylometry, and I've prepped one on topic modeling, which hasn't gone up yet. So I hope you really enjoyed this class. If you want to learn more, there are a lot of resources out there online. There are lots of resources for people who are interested in using Python to study the digital humanities, or R. The R programming language is huge, and there's really, really good resources available for that as well. So I hope you enjoyed it, and you're excited about all of the different kinds of text mining, data visualization, and data munging that you can do now. So please reach out and let us know if you have any feedback. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.